년지 첨부 조던 힘이 정존의 뭐는 첨부를 갖다 밖으로 당금 산도 실물 돈바 투제 잔라기 시험자를 근데 전적으로 되는 게 정감선 저걸 투지션을 일라면 지금 편조자라 소란
The unsurpassed, profound, and wonderful Dharma is difficult to encounter in billions of aeons. I now see it, hear, receive, and uphold it, about to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning, to liberate all beings, thus generate the supreme bodhicitta.
下面我们讲那个
Let us begin our class on the wish-fulfilling treasury. Currently, we're studying on how to rely on a spiritual teacher. Previously, we have already covered on the characteristics of a qualified teacher and then how to rely on a teacher. In terms of how to, we talked about the three delights. According to resting the mind as well as the other shastras, the three delights are rarely taught in such a way individually. So over here, it talks quite specifically about them. Yesterday, we have already talked about how to delight the teacher by relying the teacher with our physical body, and there are the two aspects. One is to give up, and the other one is the actions that needs to be practiced or need to adapt, as well as the language that needs to give up and adapt. Now let's look at, in terms of the language, we've already talked about what needs to be adapted, and today we're going to talk about what needs to be given up. So unvirtuous speech should be eradicated. Untruthful, divisional, coarse, frivolous, teasing language, as well as the kinds of language that is in violation of the teaching, the harmful and hurtful language, also cursing, and language as such. If you were to speak of the four types of unvirtuous language, as well as speaking the untruthful words or divisional words, as well as teasing language, the coarse and rude language, including singing, joking, teasing in front of the teacher, those kinds of dishonorable language should be eradicated. Of course, those kinds of languages that we do use among family and friends, but when it is time to speak to the teacher, then we should have the heart of respect. So whenever we speak in front of the teacher, those kinds of language that would be in violation of the teachings, as well as the hurtful language, the kinds of language that is rude, the kind of language that is testing the other's limits, those would be the language that creates obscurations, so we should eradicate them. Because whenever we can use warm and kind language, we can make friends, and if we were to make enemies, usually we would make enemies with language first as well. So language is definitely a very special tool in the communication with the others. If you cannot use this special tool well, then it is very possible that you would break the relationships between yourself and the teacher. But if you can, then your good language and kind language can create auspicious coincidence and auspicious dependent arisings. Therefore, we need to be very careful in the process of communicating with the teacher. Otherwise, if you don't protect your language, lots of the dependent arising may be broken or the coincidence could be inauspicious. Language is indeed a key. Whenever a great master is visiting or an authority is visiting or even a celebrity, people usually have lots of respect for those people with high stature. But after they giving a speech, for example, and if they're not very skillful in that, people would have a bad impression upon them. On the other hand, if a person who's not very well known, but the speech is rather very warm and grounded and sincere, just as it is described in the letter to a friend. There are people who can use their language that's just like honey. So in such a way, they would be able to magnetize the others. We can see that language is indeed really important. We should train to use language, not just in front of teachers, but in front of the Sangha members, as well as people who we are familiar with and not so familiar with. We need to watch and observe our language, because we can train to better our skills in using language. There were people who were not very good at using their language, but after training, I do notice that they can make big progress after a year or so. We use language to resolve various kinds of problems. We would use tens of thousands kinds of words and languages every day. However, if we were to speak of the wrong language in front of the guru, the negative deeds would be more severe than the others. Whenever we have the opportunity to be very close to the teacher, that would be great opportunities. That would be such wonderful situations for all of us. However, if we were to speak of the wrong kinds of language in front of the teacher, then the kinds of negative deeds that we can create would be more so than the others. Also, if the teacher were to scold you, and if you were to refute the teacher, if you were to talk back to the teacher, then the faults would be great. According to the Sutra of Virtuous Reverence Sutra, it says that the teacher's scolding should not be talked back to. To the worldly people, whenever we hear those negative comments from the others, we would talk back, and we would maybe even take revenge. But according to the sutra, not only you should not talk back or take revenge, you should accept with full sincerity and respect. This would be very meaningful to you. According to another sutra, it is the Noble Merit Adornment Sutra. It says that there are 4 types of Mara deeds. That is not respecting the teacher, not putting your mind on the Dharma, speak of the arrogant language, as well as grasping to the life that you have now. These 4 types of deeds of the Mara all points to that if our minds are not on the Dharma, then we would speak of the arrogant language, we would hold on to this lifetime, and we would not respect the teacher. According to many of the sutras, in fact, this is common to many of the sutras. So we should definitely respect the teacher, and we should diligently rely on the teacher properly. According to the Dhammapada Sutra, it also says that there is a particular chapter that talks about relying on the spiritual teacher. There are 21 types of examples, including the merits and the benefits, as well as the qualities of relying and making offering to the spiritual teacher. We should try our best to eradicate the negative deeds in our speech. My personal experience is that the type of people whom tend to speak of the negative language, to slander the others, if you have such habitual tendencies in your language to hurt the others, then it would be probably better for you to not communicate directly to your teacher. That might reduce your opportunities to create negative deeds. Otherwise, if you were to talk back to the teacher every time and making the teacher feel unhappy every time, that would be very negative for you. Because at the time of relying on the spiritual teacher, we should make the teacher happy with the three delights. But if you were to act the exact opposite, to practice the kinds of deeds that the teacher would not like in your body, speech, and mind, and create lots of negative and wrong views, in this way, it would directly break the relationship of you and your teacher, which would directly or indirectly lead to your own realization and your own enlightenment. On top of that, by relying on those negative deeds, you would probably fall into the lower realms and experience great pain, which is really not worth it. So the positive and negative deeds sometimes can be practiced under impulse. For example, there are lots of people who would be in prison for many years just because of the impulse of 1 second. But if you become friends with someone who's wealthy and powerful, by relying on the power of your friend, you would be able to attain the stature or attain the kinds of benefits that you can't obtain by yourself. Similarly, whenever we have this supreme object that is the teacher, then if we were to practice all virtuous deeds, then the power of the teacher would bring about great happiness that would last you for lifetimes. So we need to be careful whenever we're facing the guru, so that we can bring happiness to self and others and avoid suffering and pain to self and others. This is something we need to be very cautious with. Now let us look at the mind aspect of relying on the teacher, which also has two aspects. One is what to reject and the other one what to accept. So in the verse it says that to remember the merit of the spiritual teacher with great faith, to respect and to remember how difficult it is to encounter such a qualified teacher. Also, one should respect the other Sangha members of the teacher. This is simple to understand, talking about remembering the merits of the teacher. But I think I've mentioned this before. There were people who asked me constantly, how can I see the teacher as the Buddha? I think the key is to remember the merits of the teacher, also read the biographies or autobiographies of the great masters of the past, and constantly remembering the great kindness that those previous teachers as well as our teachers had bestowed us. In this way, from certain aspect, I think after contemplating on those scarcity of receiving the teachings and remembering the qualities as well as the merits, then we would be able to accept the kinds of actions of the teacher that are not particularly meeting to our standards. And then we can slowly generate the kind of faith. To encounter a qualified teacher is indeed extremely rare in our lifetime. So we constantly talk about how the teacher is the essence of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Therefore, we can call the teacher as the fourth jewel of the Buddha. And if we can truly generate the kind of faith that is equivalent of seeing the teacher as the Buddha, and even surpass that of the Buddha in terms of kindness, that the teacher has bestowed us, then we can definitely consider that our life can be very meaningful, especially when we have the opportunity to listen to the name of the teacher and to receive the teachings from the teacher, make inspiration in front of the teacher, and receive empowerments, blessings, even touching your heads from your teacher. I think would make your life very meaningful. Now, Ponso Rinpoche, as well as the other spiritual teachers, we have already encountered them, and which has indeed made our life meaningful. Many people would probably think that, it's just a connection, and they would feel that those teachers are not of any difference than the worldly teacher. But if you can turn your mind to the Dharma, then you would be able to recognize how supreme and how precious it is to encounter a spiritual teacher. We should be extremely honored. So we need to consider that we don't have that much time to rely on such a wonderful teacher. Some probably have the opportunity for 10 years, 20. That would be really long time to be able to rely on the teacher. So while the teacher is still healthy and is still alive in this world, we should try our best not to make the teacher angry, upset, or suffering. It is not going to be forever that we can stay with the teacher. We need to understand that eventually there will be a day that we will have to part from the teacher. At the time parting from the teacher, if you just simply cry a tear or two, that is not very meaningful. Wouldn't it be better if you can delight the teacher and serve the teacher and wholeheartedly serve the teacher when the teacher is still healthy and still alive, and try your best to refrain from those kinds of behavior and actions that would make the teacher upset. Sometimes I feel that there are kinds of disciples, after receiving benefits from their teachers, they would naturally have a sense of gratitude towards their teacher. A few days ago, I received a visitor who's a Thangka painter, and his teacher, his late teacher, was a very renowned Thangka painter and passed away. And this Thangka painter asked me to chant mantras so that his teacher would be able to be reborn in Pure Land. And I thought to myself that out of all the painters that this teacher taught, this disciple must have received some benefits and learned some knowledge from this teacher, because he is quite well known also in Tibet. Though one teacher would be able to teach tens of thousands of students, but not each and every student would be able to receive the same kinds of benefits from the teacher. If the student doesn't pay attention to receive the teaching, then both the teacher and the students probably won't remember each other well. However, if the student really truly studied well and truly take the teachings to heart and receive the benefit, then the teacher and disciple would definitely remember each other well, especially the student whom would remember the kindness that's been bestowed from the teacher, and they would try their best to pass down the teachings, and then the teachers would know that this disciple would be able to do so. Though the teacher teaches in such an equal way and bestow the teaching to everyone, but not everyone would receive the equal share of the teaching. Some people, maybe out of their wrong view or various reasons, did not receive the teaching, and some people maybe received quite a bit of the teaching. In such a way, the kind of disciple received lots of teaching would remember the kinds of great kindness of the teacher. I myself, whenever others speak of Ponso Rinpoche's name, I would naturally have an urge to cry, or thinking of the kindness of the teacher, there's a sense of gratitude naturally arises. That is a sign which shows the teacher's blessings has been implanted in the mind stream, or the wisdom has already been infused in the mind stream of the disciple. On the contrary, if speaking of the teacher's name, it doesn't make you have any special feelings at all. Not only that, if you were to feel a sense of revulsion to that, then maybe you have not received much benefits or teachings in your mind stream. So we can see that in a very simple way. Throughout the time of relying on the teacher, there are teachers at the times of attracting other disciples. A good disciple would not generate jealousy or mind of harm. Rather, a good disciple would also respect the other disciples, even to serve and practice pure perception to the others as well. And I think that varies as well. There are disciples who would have the mind of rejoice whenever the teacher is able to attract more of other disciples to spread the Dharma. And there are the ones whom, out of their selfishness, would try to block the teacher to magnetize the other disciples. We can also see that. But if you really want to help the teacher to spread the Dharma and the lineage, you should try your best to create a virtuous and auspicious dependent arising, so that all other kinds of sentient beings would be able to make connection to this Dharma. Also, at the time of when others make connection to this lineage and Dharma, we should also rejoice with great sincerity. This would be helpful to yourself as well. I remember last time when I was visiting another teacher, some people were really kind to me and tried their best to provide all kinds of food and all the provisions that I needed. And through those actions of the close disciples of that teacher, then the others would also be able to generate a sense of faith to the teacher. And on contrary, if the disciples around that teacher is rather very inappropriate in their actions, then those kinds of actions would lead to wrong views to the others towards the teacher. If you can contemplate in such a way that this teacher definitely is a qualified teacher and have such a supreme Dharma, I really wish that such wonderful Dharmas can be spread to more people, and may this teacher gather more of those disciples who have auspicious connections and can't wait to share all of those with everyone. That would be beneficial to the teacher and especially beneficial to you. According to the mind mirror, it says that there is a seed of mustard fallen from the Brahma's heaven and then goes through a needle's eye in the human realm. Such kind of incidents for this situation to happen is nearly impossible. The chances of such is similar to us encountering a qualified teacher, which is also extremely rare and precious. Especially, we have already encountered a qualified spiritual teacher out of all the 96 types of heretics' teachings. We should be quite grateful and seize the opportunity of having this time with the spiritual teacher. Especially, we should cherish such causes and conditions, and we should try to create more of those causes and conditions for relying on such spiritual teacher. The next verse talks about the kinds of minds that should be abandoned or should be eradicated. Distrust, wrong view, aggression, constantly think of the faults, belittlement, competitiveness, and arrogance against the teacher's wish without faith, the greed, anger, and wrong view should be eradicated. Throughout the time of relying on the teacher. Those kinds of wrong views, including distrust the teacher. On top of that, piles of wrong views, constantly having all kinds of aggression to the teacher, and constantly looking at the faults of the teacher. This is wrong, that is wrong, without respect to the teacher. On top of disrespect, there is a belittlement, thinking that, oh, my teacher has low disposition, has this coarse and ugly appearance without any merits, doesn't have any provisions. If one were to have all of those kinds of wrong views towards the teacher, including in terms of the worldly sense, thinking that there is a sense of competitiveness to the teacher or harming the teacher, even including the teacher's retinues, with a great sense of anger and harm, those had happened before. The other day, as I mentioned, that there were students who sued the teacher, and then later the teacher got imprisoned. The disciple afterwards felt he or she had won and quite delighted for that result. Such kind of situation truly demonstrated this kind of competitiveness and the greed, anger, and arrogance. There are also disciples out of ignorance want to brag about their importance. For example, if the teacher had never called this disciple, but the disciple would say that, oh, the teacher just called me. Just now he called me. Some of those disciples had studied Dharma for many, many years, and they would say that. They would still lie about it. We can say that it is quite arrogant of them, and they're trying to boast their importance to the others, trying to convey that I am so important, that the teacher take me quite seriously, and I am so important to the teacher. But this is such a foolish kind of action, and I personally don't think it's a very good behavior. In our world, there are all kinds of people with all kinds of mindset. There are the ones that have all kinds of greed to the teacher's provisions or harm towards the teacher, even the ones with the wrong view and specifically want to disobey the teacher. Also, the kinds of disciples who would only focus on the behaviors of the teacher and think that none of those behaviors of the teacher are proper. They would hold on to those wrong things. They would think that, oh, the teacher doesn't understand law, doesn't understand morality in the conventional sense. Whenever they look at the teacher, they would only see the faults of the teacher. This is very inappropriate, because a true spiritual teacher also, a true spiritual teacher doesn't have any selfish intentions at all. A true spiritual teacher would wholeheartedly and single-mindedly want to benefit and tame all kinds of sentient beings. Therefore, the body, speech, and mind, whatever they may be, they're the manifestations to tame the sentient beings of different capacities, the sentient beings of the four directions, of the different statures, of the different dispositions, all kinds of sentient beings. So the teacher needs to practice the four types of activities: the pacifying, increasing, magnetizing, and destroying. The kinds of sentient beings who needs those kinds of peaceful and calm and gentle ways of taming, the teacher would use the karma of pacifying and the activity of pacifying. And then to the kind of sentient beings needs generosity, then the teacher would use the activity of increasing of longevity or wisdom and so on. Those kinds of activities you don't necessarily understand. And then some needs magnetizing and some needs, for example, there are sentient beings who enjoy music and dances. Though that the teacher may not be very proficient at this, at those singing or dancing, but in order to tame those sentient beings who have those kinds of leanings, then the teacher would also act in such a way to tame those sentient beings. When wrathful action is needed for the sentient beings, then the teacher would adapt those coarse language and coarse actions to tame them, just as how Marpalotawa would treat Milarepa. Those kinds of activities. The teacher is the essence of all the wrathful and peaceful deities. Sometimes the teacher can manifest as the deity of the Vajra family, sometimes as the Padma family, which would increase all kinds of merits, and sometimes as Padma family to magnetize the sentient beings with various kinds of ways, and sometimes as the karma family, which is by relying on a very powerful way to tame the sentient beings. Such kinds of variety of manifestations of the guru would be carried out by the activity and the speech of the teacher, which would reflect on the variety of the different range and the spectrum of the teacher's behavior. In such a way, as disciples, we should use a pure mind and a pure perception with great respect to those teachers. Because the teachers are constantly benefiting sentient beings, and the sentient beings have such different capacity and different disposition. So the teachers' dresses and their ways of carrying themselves would not be the same. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, for example, I mentioned this in the memoir. I said that I remember that I met him in New Delhi. At the time, he didn't wear any shirt. So I thought it was because of the weather. In New Delhi, it was really hot. Maybe that's why he didn't wear any shirts. Then later I met him again in Bhutan, and the weather in Bhutan is very similar to Tibet, which is quite cool. At that time, when I met him, he was bare from waist up again, except he was wearing this Manjushri statue and some blessed objects. Other than that, he didn't wear any shirts. I didn't quite understand it back then, but later when I read his biography that his disciples wrote later on, he stated that back in the 80s, Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche used to wear all the proper robes, and he was very strict with his clothing. But after being in retreat for a period of time, maybe because of some special signs of the deity, and maybe because of a way of demonstrating the naked awareness, he started to manifest in such a way. Later on, Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche had an opportunity to visit Tibet, and then at that time, he was still maintaining this manifestation. And some disciples asked him to dress up something, a shawl or something. But Rinpoche said that if you think I am not dignified this way, I will take my skirt off as well. And then the disciples not dare to say anything other than anymore. I think those kinds of manifestations can be difficult for us to understand. But we need to know there are teachers who would manifest in a gentle way, some in a more wrathful way. From simply their appearance, some of us feel that oh, the teacher's behavior is not fitting to the teachings given in the Vinaya, in the Vajrayana, in this and that, in the conventional sense, in the moral sense. We may feel that some of those actions and activities of the teacher doesn't fit into our reference of what is correct, but maybe that is because the profound meaning of the teacher is beyond our reference. I remember that I've written this in the memoir of my trip with Pontsog Rinpoche. He has 2 dogs, and he carried those dogs with him on those trips. Some of the gishis, as well as some of the officials at that time, after meeting them, they couldn't accept that. They felt that it was unfathomable. Even on the way back to Larungar, on the way we stayed at this hotel, and some of those staff members felt that the dogs really stink and the dogs are very naughty. So in those incidences, we would use incense and so on. Anyhow, I remember there's a story that's told in the Sutra of Ashoka. There was once an arhat who lived in a monastery, and near the monastery there's a female tiger that gives birth to a baby tiger cub and then dies. After the female tiger dies, this arhat started to feed the tiger cub. Lots of the fellow Sangha members, as well as the disciples of this arhat, didn't understand, because why would a monastic feed an animal? This is not dignified. So they started asking him, why would you do that? And then the arhat stated, saying that I am simply planting a seed of liberation in this tiger cub. This baby tiger cub died at a young age, and then around the time of death, the arhat taught him the Dharma of without aggression, without self, and the Dharma that is peace and nirvana. Also request this tiger to make aspiration to be reborn as a human being. Later, around the local area, this little baby cub indeed was reborn into a human being around this area. At the age of 7, the arhat asked him to get renounced in the monastery, so he did. And after giving him teachings, this young novice attained the fruition of arhat. The other disciples couldn't understand it, and saying that we've been here for so long, but this young novice attained arhathood in such a quick time. How is that so? And then the arhat said that, oh, you had no idea. This was the baby tiger cub whom is now the young novice. When he was still an animal, I was taming him. I was teaching him Dharma. You all had all kinds of wrong views. But now, look at him. He had already attained arhathood. Why are you still here without any fruition? So the rest of the disciples at that moment felt quite embarrassed. For the same reason, on one hand, when we generated wrong views towards the actions of the teacher, we should be extremely embarrassed because we had not attained the fruition of arhathood. On the other, we also need to understand that the teacher would use various ways to tame various beings. But I need to also remind you that there are charlatans, after knowing this teaching, they would abuse this particular teaching by saying that, oh, I am a true qualified spiritual teacher. As a disciple, you need to view all of my actions as my skillful means. My actions are full of secret meanings, so you should not generate wrong view. Otherwise, you would fall into the hell realm. So you have to listen to me. If you don't listen to me, you're simply violating the teachings from your Vajra master. So if a teacher like such would use these kinds of language and ways to blackmail the disciples to practice exactly as he wishes for and practice all kinds of inappropriate deeds, this is, of course, a completely different situation. We need to truly understand the teachings in the sutras and shastras, and we need to make sure that a true spiritual teacher that is qualified, his or her action would be full of secret meanings. Knowing that, we also need to be aware there are charlatans, and there are the ones who abuse this particular teaching. That is why we need to make observation of the spiritual teacher for 12 years or 3 years, for a long period of time. And then, once you are certain you can wholeheartedly rely on this teacher, then that would be really wonderful. Otherwise, if you do not make the observation of the teacher, but simply thinking that it's just the teaching, secret teaching, and the skillful means of the teacher, but not knowing that this teacher indeed has lots of greed and anger and jealousy and aggression and arrogance and so on, then those kinds of situation could lead you to fall into lower realms, and it is rather quite meaningless. However, to the kind of qualified teacher, we need to contemplate upon their wonderful merits all the time. That being said, lots of the Asian teachers, though that they're well endowed with all kinds of merits, they would say that, oh, I have no merits, I'm so ashamed of my practice, I have lots of the 3 poisons, I'm not sure where I will be after death, maybe I will be born in hell realm, I'm so fearful of those. But indeed, they are very certain that they will be reborn in Pure Land. They will be able to be with the Amitabha and with the great teachers of the past. So you have to see through all of that and be able to see the merits of the teacher. Otherwise, you're simply like a blind that is not able to see the forms on the outside. Sometimes it is very much related to your own merit. There are people who would keep on talking about the faults of the Sangha members and the teachers. They would say that, oh, this is not good and that is not good. I'm not sure what's happening with our teacher. Is he getting too old? Is he getting really confused nowadays? What's wrong with our Sangha member? They would keep on saying those negative things. In Tibet, because of the habitual tendencies, at the time of slandering the teacher, there are people who would just kept on chanting the Vajrasattva mantra. So they would speak negative words at the same time of chanting the Vajrasattva mantra. It is really a sign of not able to control the vicious speech of oneself. And it is a sign of the disturbing mind and the distracted mind, as well as the very turbid mind one has. Because you would be able to see one's mind from the reflection of one's language. Whether this person has a pure mind or not, you can see that very clearly from their language. Such things had happened throughout history. For example, a well-known figure, after having a meal with some government officials, he was able to see what was about to happen. In some of the biographies, we can see that. If we can try our best to practice pure perception, which could only lead to merit and not faults, though you are risking to overly practice pure perception and being fooled by a charlatan, which could be dangerous. However, there are stories on how pure perception could also lead to realization. For example, the one of looking at mistakenly taking the tooth of the dog as the tooth of the Buddha, and then the old bhikshu whom cannot give teachings but only kept on repeating, saying that it is suffering and it is suffering, and then lead to the female disciple understanding that this is the most profound pith instruction and attained the first fruition. This is simply coincidence. The teacher did not thinking to tame her, to take her as a disciple. It is simply that he was thinking that it's suffering that I don't understand how to express it. But the disciple thought that it took it as the most important piece of instruction and then attained realization. The dependent arising in Buddhism is indeed unfathomable. But generally speaking, a true spiritual teacher with the great power and blessing would be able to lead people to enlightenment, and that is appropriate and reasonable. Within this part, there are lots of the teachings quoted on how one should not observe the faults of the teacher. Now, there is another situation. If you were in this situation that someone told on you in front of the teacher, then what should we do? There are people who tend to generate wrong view towards the teacher, or sometimes generate the wrong view and even revengeous mind towards the one who told on oneself. In such kind of situation, according to Longchenpa's perspective, if someone were to really told on you to the teacher, and then the teacher indeed got upset about that, then at that time you should really practice confession rather than thinking of revenge and thinking of to fight a tooth for tooth. You have to rather think that this is my karma. Some people may have told on me intentionally or unintentionally, but indeed the teacher is angry at it. Do not focus on the one who told on you and thinking that, oh, this person told on me and this person must be a Mara. Do not think in such a way, because the situation could be that the teacher is not necessarily deaf about whatever is happening. In fact, the teacher's reaction is probably not based on one or two or three people's telling on you. Rather, the teacher would be quite aware of the situation. Ponzo Rinpoche once also scolded someone in class because someone told on certain things or reflected certain things to Rinpoche back then. Whatever we did in the past that's negative are indeed inappropriate. When such kinds of situation happens, we do need the spiritual teacher to criticize us and to scold us so that we can be awake. Even in the worldly sense, a leader or your manager, at the time that you made a mistake, they would criticize you and scold you for your mistake. Similarly, a true spiritual teacher would have to do that as well. And you should view it as a blessing and a sign to dispel obstacles obstacles. If you can contemplate in this way, then you will receive the blessings and the obstacles will be dispelled. Those kinds of situations happen to me myself as well. Because in this world, people can be quite complex. Even some of the most wonderful spiritual teachers would still have to live in the complex webs of interpersonal relationships, and they still need to live in such kinds of situations. A qualified teacher can still be influenced by other people around them, or sometimes the teacher is just very clear about the situation. Whichever case, you should not think to take revenge upon whomsoever told on you in front of the teacher. Rather, you should have a sense of kindness to them because they are truly helping you on your path of practice. So all of those are how one should serve the teacher with body, speech, and mind, the kinds of disciples of the middling capacity. Now let's look at how the superior practitioners would delight the teacher through their practice. In the verse, it says that practice according to the teaching and then make the offering, contemplate and listen to the wonderful Dharma as well as all kinds of meanings. Stay in the groves to practice the most essential meanings, to spend the days in practice and following all the previous masters. Over here, it states the most supreme offering, which is to practice, to follow the teachings and to practice it. According to many of the sutras, it says that the most supreme offering to a teacher is the Dharma offering. The Dharma offering includes listening, contemplation, and practice. All the way from Shakyamuni Buddha to our lineage master, all of those great masters place greatest importance upon listening, contemplation, and practice. So later on, all of our fellow members over here, whomsoever have the opportunity to become a spiritual teacher or become an abbot in a monastery, you have to place listening, contemplation, and practice as the most and foremost important. As I stated before, in a really wonderful, magnificent monastery, if there is no study, contemplation, and practice, then it is just like a school without education. Even in a monastery, there is one monk or one monastic. You should ask that monastic to listen to the Dharma. You can give teaching to that monastic every day. Wouldn't that be wonderful? One disciple and one teacher spending the day like that. According to the sutra, it is stated that the most meritorious actions two people can do together is that one give teaching and the other one listening. Some of the Dharma teachers nowadays would say that, we don't have too many people in the monastery, we can't really give teachings. If you're an abbot, even if you have one lay practitioner, one monastic, then you give them order. Tell them that stand over here, sit right in front of me. I am going to give you teachings on Lotus Sutra today. You never know. Maybe they will both attain realization. In terms of listening, contemplation, and practice, listening is to listen to the Dharma teachings that's given by the teacher. The teachings including Sutrayana and Tantrayana. And then contemplation is to contemplate upon those teachings by yourself, or through debates and discussions. And then the practice is to engage in actual practice. The listening, contemplation, and practice all should be practiced together, because you cannot discard either one of them. So for all of us, listening, contemplation, and practice is the most important. Therefore, the offering of this would be the most important. We should follow the lineage and tradition of the great masters of the past, inherit their spirit of listen and contemplate and practice, so that we can attain liberation through this. If you don't have listening, contemplation, and practice, it would be extremely difficult to attain liberation through in samsara. So my suggestion is that after finish listening to the Dharma, you should then go to a quiet place, such as groves and caves, and some of those quiet places where you can contemplate and practice the essence of the Dharma. In practice in this way, and spending your days and time in the practice would be extremely meaningful, and you are truly spreading the Dharma. This is the first aspect. And now in the verse it says that practice upon the qualified teacher's biography, contemplate upon the merits of the body, speech, and mind. I shall also follow you as an example in order to attain the supreme fruition. For that I shall diligently study, contemplate, and practice. So over here it says that one shall practice upon the spiritual teacher's biography. Because according to Sutrayana or the Vajrayana teachings, it states that the teacher is the manifestation of the Buddha. The Sutrayana teachings such as the Parinirvana Sutra as well as the Great Drum Sutra also states that the teacher is the manifestation of the Buddha. In such a way, I shall follow the biography of the teacher, how the teacher engaged in study at the young age, and how the teacher engaged in study and contemplation, and then how the teacher engaged in actual practice, and how the teacher actually carried out the activities of benefiting sentient beings. So we need to practice the biography of the qualified teacher. I think this year it is necessary for us to study some of the biographies of the great teachers, great masters. What kind of biography should we study this year? I think the biographies of great masters of the past is very beneficial and full of blessings. Especially, we need to contemplate the merits of the body, speech, and mind of the great masters. So one of the options is the biography of the first Dudrum Rinpoche, but it seems that his biography is kind of far away from us because his biography talks quite a bit about his dream of how Khandroma, the Dakinis would lead him somewhere, and in contrary, our dreams are completely confused, but his dreams are completely pure, so it's a bit far from our experience. And then he also talked about the subjugating activities as well as his powers when he encountered those obstacles from the Maras. And when we read those parts of the biographies, we may get quite terrified. In such a way, it is difficult for us to live in this world. So that's one option. And another option is Khyentse Ishidorje. His biography is also quite transcending and surpassing our imagination as well. Anyhow, I think we need to remember the merits of the teacher's body, speech, and mind, and study and follow the teacher. Our teachers are so supreme in terms of the bodhicitta, their pure precepts, their activities of benefiting beings. They're such wonderful and supreme beings. But if you were to see your teacher as some ordinary being, then it is very difficult for you to receive those supreme qualities. On the contrary, if you were able to view those qualities of your teacher as being supreme, then the wisdom of the teacher would be able to pour into your mind stream, just like a little tata mode, and you'll be just like a tata mode of the teacher. So we should think and contemplate in such a way that in order to attain the fruition of my supreme teacher, then I shall also follow your activities of studying, contemplation, and practice. Now, the last verse on how to rely on the merits of relying on the teacher. Such kinds of skillful means on relying on the teacher creates infinite merits, such as entering into the right path, making discernment, fulfill the merits, purify obscurations, eradicate obscurations, and attain the fruition of the noble ones, also swiftly arrive the city of liberation. Now we have already covered the whole chapter on relying on the teacher, the various kinds of ways of relying on the teacher. If you can practice those, the merit would be quite vast. Let it be from the body, speech, or mind. I think previously we didn't quite understand how to do so, but now we do. That is the reason I wanted to take some time to be quite extensive in explaining this particular chapter, because I feel that if you understand it, then the wise ones would definitely practice accordingly, would definitely carry out their actions appropriately and rely on the teacher. I constantly think that it is such a wonderful fortune of me to study the words of my perfect teacher first before I relied on the teacher, because I had already studied how to rely on the teacher before I relied on the teacher. In such a way, I had no regret later on. I think it is quite crucial for all of you to understand how to rely on the teacher and the merit of relying on the teacher, which had been expounded in the sutras and shastras. The merit is infinite. After relying on the teacher, we will be able to enter the path of liberation. I think in the now world, in terms of studying the Dharma, over here in Larungar, we are quite excellent. I don't dare to say that we're the only one at all. I don't dare to say that. I don't make that a statement at all. However, when it comes to relying on the spiritual teacher, when it comes to studying the Dharma, in terms of the lineage of Shrayana and Vajrayana, as well as our steady atmosphere and retinues, we're considered doing quite well. I've been to various countries and different places. And comparatively speaking, in the Dharmic, in the studying of the Dharma, we are quite excellent. I am not stating that we're the best in studying the astronomy, the physics, and engineer or AI or all of those kinds of knowledge. If you want to acquire those knowledge, you can go to MIT, Harvard, and Tsinghua University, and so on. But if you truly want to study the pith instructions of the Mahayoga, Anuyoga, Adiyoga, all the way to maybe even the Sutrayana teachings, if you really want to study those Dharma, then this place is indeed supreme. Over here, we have all the resources that could provide you to enter into the right path, to discern right from wrong, to accumulate merit, to purify obscurations, to dispel obstacles, and all the way to attain the fruition dimensions, such as bodhisattva bhumis and the Buddhahood, and to liberation to benefit limitless sentient beings. But all of those cannot be attained without relying on the true spiritual teacher. If we can truly sincerely and properly rely on the spiritual teacher and avoid those faults of not relying on spiritual teacher, then we will definitely be able to attain all of those and acquire all of those. We should avoid all kinds of faults associated to not rely on the spiritual teacher, as well as the faults of inappropriately relating to the teacher, which would lead us not to be able to enter into the path of liberation, and so on and so forth. That's stated over here. To sum up, the source of all kinds of merits is the teacher. If we can rely on the teacher properly and make the teacher delighted, then we will have the opportunity to attain liberation. At the time of relying on the teacher, we need to avoid the wrong ways or faulty ways to relate to the teacher. Then we will be able to have hundreds of kinds of merits. If we can rely on the teacher according to the 50 verses of serving the teacher, it states that to serve the teacher properly is to benefit ourselves. If one were to falsely serve the teacher, then it is only to harm ourselves. In the sutras, it states that whenever the disciples have the intention to harm the teacher or relate to the teacher in a faulty way, in such a way, it is only the disciple that would fall into the lower realms and not the teacher. Similarly, if we can look at it the other way, if we can relate to the teacher and rely on the teacher properly, then in our lifetime, in this lifetime, we have the opportunity to attain liberation. So we need to use the mind of joy, the joyful mind and the respectful mind to relate to the teacher through the three actions and through the proper ways of relating to the teacher that is qualified. In such a way, we will have the opportunity to attain liberation. These kinds of path instructions are difficult to find. So the best way of studying it is to compare our own actions to the teachings over here and to truly adjust your actions according to the teaching. Especially, we need to start studying the biography of the teachers who may seem to have years' nose and walking like normal beings and even get ill and sometimes have their tempers, but are truly transcendent beings. They have transcended the mundane beings in their insights. We need to rely on the teacher in such a way. This is the conclusion of the 8th chapter of Wish Fulfilling Treasury.